Hi, this is Alex Rodriguez from Secure Ideas / Professionally Evil, and today we're going to be going over the new release for Bash Tricks, which is understanding your env, or your environment. So, now that we're on the third release, go ahead and go to the weekly lessons. And then, as you can see, this is understanding your env, or environment. Env is short for environment. And so, of course, the prerequisites again, make sure that you have Bash set up, configured, hyperlinks there for all the instructions on how to do that. Now, the reason why it's important to understand your Bash environment is it can affect the way that your terminal responds to different commands. One of the examples for that is the editor command, or editor environment variable that gets set with a lot of operating systems. And it can possibly, specifically for that environment variable, it's possible to, if the right circumstances are set up, you can possibly use it to privilege escalate, and that's what that video below goes into, so feel free to check that out. It's a really cool video talking about how to backdoor with metadata, as the author says. But specifically, why is it important? The first reason is it can affect how your terminal responds to different commands, and that can help in your debugging efforts if you're just trying to do any type of sysadmin work, or as the last point is talking about, know what you're working with for a pen test, because there are some times when you're in specific environments that developers will set possible secrets or passwords in environment variables. So always checking to make sure what's in your environment as soon as you get into it is really important from a attacker or pen testing perspective. So possible context as to environment variables or around environment variables. So an example of that is if you use Amazon and you use their system manager, whenever you connect with the system manager, it actually tells you what version of the system manager it's using, and a bunch of other interesting metadata around that service. So being able to understand where you're at in the system, what type of environment variables are set, and looking at those to possibly gain more context is really important. So, like I mentioned, privilege or context for the current user you're running under. There could also be a possibility of being able to place a malicious executable inside of someone's path if they've misconfigured it properly. And an example of that is if a user sets a folder in their home directory as a possible path for execution, then normally that's better practice than if they set another arbitrary location on the system that could be written to by another user possibly. So if, for example, and this would be horrible, if you set your path to include everything in /temp, if anyone was able to write, or since anyone's able to write the /temp, whatever binary you go to try and call will hit that first /temp for your path. So it could be, that's a very rare circumstance, at least it should be, but it's a possibility for an attack vector. So understanding how path variables are set for different users on the system can be really useful for possible privilege escalation or lateral movement on the system. And then lastly, Hal Pomeranz did a webinar with Black Hills talking about a SSH key attack, and it's essentially similar to how there's a pass the hash on Windows, but you can use that with SSH keys if you have a SSH agent running, and you can assume context of that user's environment, and there's some other information, so I'd recommend just going ahead and watching it. But it's a really informative video. Alright, so now we've got the examples, and we're going to go hop over to the terminal. Alright, so I've already started up the Vagrant machine. I'm going to go ahead and SSH and get into our bash environment and put these side by side so I can cheat. Alright, so we're going to do type env, and as you can see, env is actually a binary that's on the system, and this is an executable that is really nice for being able to extract information about your environment, and it puts it in a well formatted way. So if we just go ahead and type env, then you can see it prints out all the different environment variables. So I know that this currently is not a secret, but if you can imagine possibly an API key or something like that that a developer would need their code to access whenever it runs, it's a very interesting threat vector to make sure that you pay attention to whenever you're doing a pen test. So now, if you end up in a more restricted context to where the env binary is not available, there's actually a built-in command called set, and as you can see, as long as you've got bash, set is a built-in, is a shell built-in, so we'll do help set. And this is a large man page slash help information page talking about all the different options that set can do. It's a really powerful built-in shell command that can be rather useful specifically for shell scripting, which I'll show you in a little bit, as to why I really like being able to modify how my shell scripts execute. So after all of this, one of the things that you can just do is if you just type set, and we're going to pipe that to less so that way we can scroll like how I was doing before, it also prints out all of your environment variables. So this is really useful if you're in a instance of a restricted shell to where they might not have copied in that env binary, and it gives you a bunch of information about your current shell session. Say that 5 times fast. Alright, so as you can see from right up here, it's showing a bunch of different information for the bash version and how it was built and the shell options. This is some things that you can do more research in. It shows you the current directory that you're in, and that's it. This is a useful environment variable for if you need to parse things in a shell script and you don't want it to be a new line character. But do not do this for whenever you need to execute a command. There's actually a built-in command that we'll talk about later as to it'll parse the command properly for you and put it into an array. So that's, again, it's going to be later, but just a little informative and helpful tip. And alright, so now that we've looked at the environment with set, one of the other useful things that is not apparent just by using set inside of here is that set actually also shows you the different functions that are defined for your shell as well. So if you do set again after I just created that function, you can see that it shows me the function of testings, and here's my echo hello. So we can do the type command that we had learned last week to go ahead and check and make sure that we see that in our actual shell. Type testing is a function, and then here's the function. So you can see where it might be useful to, if a attacker, from a blue team perspective, if an attacker set a malicious function, you could be able to tell what's been set, aliases, stuff like that as well. So a little bit more expansive version of this is if we just type exit and we get back down to the main machine and then we type set here. This is an example of different functions that have been created for this box. And this box was created by the chef bento team. If you go look for bento packer, that's where this box came from. And these are some different functions that either they've declared or just come pre-installed on the operating system. So, and we can just do the type command again just to show you that they are functions. And is a function. So this is really useful for a blue team perspective to know what's gotten configured for your environment that could possibly be malicious, and also from an attacker perspective of being able to know if a blue team possibly set a interesting or revealing function for different users to allow their workflow to be easier. So just a interesting and important tidbit to keep in mind. Alright, so now we're back in here. So a strange nuance that I actually found out while doing this video was this Docker container has a strange nuance to where it actually shows the shell, which is normally supposed to be the current shell that you're running under, as ash, which is normally a sh or shell script alternative compared to a full bash alternative. So if we type sh and then we type help, because normally help is a built-in, you can see we've got the set command in here. So let's go ahead and run set. And as you can see now, it's running under the ash shell, even though we typed in sh. In 1 second we'll check that. But you can tell that it's running underneath the ash shell because it's using the .ash history for the hist file. And like I said, just being able to look at your environment variables and knowing how to look at them can give you this important context as to where you're running, how you're running, and possibly lead to more attack vectors or just general reconnaissance information. So we can actually do a which sh. If we do an ls-tech l for the previous command, we can see that it's a symlink to bin busybox. And then we can do tech f. Yep, bin busybox. So just some extra information, and we'll be going over what those commands mean in a future video, but just to show you some extra information. Alright, so an interesting shortcut in the bash shell is that whenever you're going to, say, your home directory, so if you just type cd and you hit enter, it will put you in your home directory for whatever user you're currently logged in as. And then a lesser known functionality of cd is you can actually do cd space hyphen and that will take you back to your old working directory. So if we do a set grep old path old pwd, sorry, set grep old pwd, you can see that it's actually stored in our shell environment variables our old path. So we can do cd hyphen and that will take us back to /bash tricks. The really useful command, especially for shell scripting. A more appropriate for shell scripting command would probably be push and popd, which we can go more into that later, but you can just, it's really useful. I actually learned this from one of my coworkers, Jason, and I was blown away. It's essentially imitating how a stack would react, but inside of bash, so it's really useful. And whenever I tried to, by the way, if you do type cd, you can see that cd is a built-in shell command, so if we do help cd, for some weird reason, I couldn't find any information on the hyphen like I had found in the past. So I actually linked to one of cd's man pages listed, and you can see here cd hyphen will go back to the last directory you looked at, old pwd. So that's nice, and sometimes you just have to do a Google search to find what you're looking for, a little bit more descriptive. And then the other, like I had mentioned before, useful thing that set is good for is whenever you're doing shell scripting. So if you do, I've actually created a blog post about how to make your shell scripts more identifiable whenever they break. I looked at it from another blog post that someone else created, that they called it a hardening script environment. So this is a link to my blog post where I detail out all the different sources that I retrieved. My command this is the command that I append to after the shebang for my shell scripts. I always set this up so that way it's a modified script hardening. And this is the original blog post that I had found this from, and a link to my coworker that had told me about that. And here it goes into an explanation of what everything means and why it's important. So really useful if you're doing shell scripting. This part in particular, if you set the environment variable of debug in your shell, then it will allow you to get more verbose information. So instead of having to create different lines for being able to try and debug information, uncommenting and commenting, which is what I had been doing for a while, you can use environment variables, like we talked about today, to be able to make your information more verbose. And that's kind of more of a traditional programming situation. So, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. I'll link to the GitHub repo. Please let me know and reach out if you have any questions or you want to see any type of future topics. And hope you have a good day. Take care. Bye.